Hello and welcome to Mooney's Mythic Podcast. Mooney's Mythic Podcast is sponsored by fire, red hot flames, passion, heat, ignition, power. Thank you so much, fire, for being in our lives. Thank you so much, fire, for being one of the elements. Thank you for connecting us back to the ancestors. Thank you for bringing us right down to that fire at the centre of the earth. Thank you for shooting us up to that sun up high in the sky. Thank you for helping us to remember that when we need to burn something, when we need to let go of something, when we really want some movement, that we can light a candle, that it's enough. Thank you for helping us when we want to remember someone, we can light a candle. Thank you, thank you, thank you for everything that you do for us, fire, for the way you heat and warm us, for the way that you nourish our food and cook us and our food really well. Thank you. Thank you so much. Here I am jumping on for an episode that I'm going to record now and put in the bag so that it'll come out on Friday when I'm at the festival. And this is for you, Tess, who didn't want to go a week without one. So it might not be as long. I was going to say well thought out. It's not a great advert at the beginning of a podcast. It may not be as long, but it'll be just as juicy, I promise you. Whoo, you came back. You're back. You're back. Or maybe you're here for the first time, in which case I just say to you, welcome aboard. Come, nestle. Come, plump your cushion and enjoy this ride, which is Mooney's Mythic Podcast, where I meander around story and depth and magic and hopefully pull a few exciting rabbits out of the hat for you. I've been trying to record this podcast all day, to get down to sitting down and recording this podcast, but I haven't been able to because my son has been suspended from school for some midsummer rutting. And I'm looking around me and I'm seeing that energy all around, you know, the kind of the pushing and the reaching and the stretching and the growing. And and his teacher said to me, because he got into some trouble, and his teacher said to me, he just needs to learn not to take matters into his own hands. And I was thinking, oof, I think I've been teaching him to take responsibility, and where's the line and where's the learning? And it's just got me thinking, but not too deeply, because this is a quick old podcast for those of you that don't want to miss a week, and I'll be back with some hot takes from this experience next week. So thanks for coming on, and if you can recommend a friend to this podcast, I'd really appreciate it. It'd be great to see the numbers growing. It'd be really, really brilliant for me. And when I've been putting this podcast together, I thought that I would just go and go through it, through the themes under the lime flower tree, because it's blossoming. And usually I pick it this time of year, but when I went to the lime flower tree, it had these tiny brown spots on the flowers. So I didn't pick it, but I just laid under it. And as I laid under it, I remembered the Seed Sisters telling me that back in the day, we would, if we had a dispute, if the villagers had a dispute, then it would be taken to the lime tree, and the dispute would be discussed under the lime tree. So I'm just putting the magic of the lime out there. I'm intending the magic of the lime out there for you, Noah, for your teachers, for everyone that's been involved in this altercation, that you can really listen to each other and you can really understand where your actions, like what your actions look like from the outside when you're a big, strong teenage boy. Here we are, and it's midsummer. Just passed. We've had the full moon. We've had the sun suspended in the sky. You know, the solstice means sol, sun, ice, stillness, like frozen. And the solstices is when the sun stay still in the sky, I think, for about 3 days. And so this is when the sun, when there's the most daylight hours of the year, and it's such a time to celebrate. And I talked a lot about that in the last podcast, but I thought as this is going out, it'll be a week past solstice or more by the time this comes out. So I've been thinking about the shadow of that. I've been thinking about the excess and the energy that we don't know what to do with, and the lack of control and all those kind of things. So that's why I started thinking about this week's story. And this week's story, there's a Hans Christian Andersen version, but also this story, most famously, I think, in recent times, has been in the great book Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Now, when I went to train with her in Colorado, and she asked that we call her Dr. E because she says no one pronounces her name correctly, so I'm going to call her Dr. E from now on. And I've had my book 30 years, something like that probably. It's a really amazing resource in my life, and certainly meeting with her and training with her was an extraordinary experience for me, where I just felt like, there's my lineage, you're my people, I tell stories from the same well as you. And then when I got back, I was like looking around and thinking, lots of women have this book, lots of women know this book, but not many men. And I asked my friend, who's a man and pretty sensitive and connected, and I said, have you ever read Women Who Run with the Wolves? And he said, no. He said, but it's been on the bedside table of every woman I've ever slept with. So that gets me thinking about, women are reading this deep, deep book, and how to share it with everyone. So I started running these courses based on Women Who Run with the Wolves, where we go through every story. And I've done some in person and some online, and that's been amazing. There's loads and loads of people who've had this book for years, but it's a tomb. It's a massive book, and it's great to just go through in a circle every single story. Really brilliant. And this story I've told many times in many different ways, with music and with dancing and with all kinds of things, but I'm going to tell it, and then we'll talk a little bit about disseminating it, looking into the depths of it. Because when I was training with Dr. E, she said that she didn't want anyone to tell the stories in her book without breaking them down afterwards, their deeper meaning. So here we go. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. Sometimes I feel like a marvelous child. A long, long way from home. And that's what she was. She was a motherless child who had no shoes. But she was resourceful and canny, and she loved collecting little scraps of fabric, and she knew that one day she'd do something with those scraps of fabric. And she began to collect and notice that red was the colour that she liked the best. A little bit of ribbon here, or silk there, a piece of thread there. And as she gathered them all up and began to stitch them together, she knew what she was making. She was making a pair of red shoes. And they were pretty rough, and they were ragged, and they were crude, but she loved them, and she was proud of them. And even though she still had to work really hard, like sometimes she was out till after dark, digging in the earth, trying to find roots that her and her family could eat. And often she went to bed and her stomach would be bang, bang, banging with hunger. She was still living a fine life. But as she was walking through the woods one day, a gilded carriage approached, golden, metal, shining. The door opened and the face of an old woman appeared. She told her that she was going to take her home and treat her like her own little girl. She told her that she would have everything she needed, that she would have a fine life of richness and splendour. And so the girl walked in to the carriage, and the door closed behind her, and off they went. And so to the wealthy woman's house they went, and there the first thing they did was to run her a bath, and they soaped her and scrubbed her and cleaned her and clubbed her and scrubbed her and cleaned her and scraped her, and they brushed all the tangles out of her hair, and they plaited it so that her eyebrows were even higher on her forehead, and she was given white underwear and a fine woolen dress, bit itchy, white socks and black shiny shoes. Where are my red shoes? What? Those? Oh, they were good for nothing. We threw them on the fire. Think no more of it. You're much better off with these. The shoes she had on, they were stiff. How does anyone ever walk in these? And the manners, oh my goodness, she had to say this at this time and that at that time, and nod her head this way and stand up at that moment, eat her food like this, and not speak unless she was spoken to, but not ignore anyone if they spoke to her, because that would be rude. And all of the energy that would have gone out, all of the laughs and the cackles and the spits and all of it began to get pushed inside. And inside it began to grow like a secret fire. Inside it began to grow like knives pointing inwards. Inside it began to grow. Now when the girl became old enough to be confirmed, the old woman decided that she would take her herself to buy her a brand new pair of shoes. So they went to the house of the crippled shoemaker. Now this old woman, she couldn't see very well, but the girl saw them. She saw them straight away. In the case on the window, there were a pair of shining red shoes. Red like lipstick, red like glamour, red like blood. And she put on those shoes, and as she put them on, she noticed that the old woman couldn't see the colour. "Are they black?" she said. "Oh, yes," said the girl. And so the shoes were bought, and off they went, with a little wink from the shoemaker. Now the next day, everyone at church, look at, oh no, disgusting. Oh, who does she think she is? Shouldn't be wearing them. Scandalous. They stared and they whispered, and even the angels on the walls looked down and tutted at the girl as she strode past. But the girl loved the shoes, and she loved the shoes even more for the attention she was getting. So when the choir hummed and the vicar spoke and the organ pumped, the child thought nothing. Only thoughts for her beautiful shoes filled her mind. But by the end of the day, the old woman had been told more than once about the shoes that she'd been wearing. And the woman was furious. "After all I've done for you, after everything I've done for you, after all I've done," she said as she slammed the shoes on a high shelf. "Never wear them again," she warned. But the next Sunday came, and the girl couldn't help it. She chose the red shoes over the black ones, and they walked to church. But at the door of the church, there was an old soldier. He had his arm in a sling and wore a little jacket and had a red beard. He bowed and said, "Can I just dust your precious shoes?" And the girl, she put her feet out straight away, and he tapped the soles of her shoes with a little wig-a-jig song that made her soles itch. "Remember to stay for the dance," he smiled. And he winked at her too. Again, everybody stared and whispered and disapproved of her shoes, but she loved them. They were bright like berries. They were bright like raspberries, bright like pomegranates, bright like strawberries, bright like summer, bright like hot heat. And she could hardly think of anything as she wore them. She just lifted them and admired them and looked and watched the attention, and she loved it. But she forgot to sing. And as she was moving to leave the church, the soldier called out, "What beautiful dancing shoes!" And she took a little turn right there to show off that, yes, they were dancing shoes, and she knew how to dance. And so she span and she turned and she twisted and she pointed and she jumped and she leapt in the air and she waltzed and she waltzed. But once they began to move, they wouldn't stop. And she danced and trampled all the flower beds, and she danced over the gravestones, and it was like she totally lost control. She danced and danced and danced to a field across the way. The old woman's coachman could see what was happening, and he ran after her, and he picked her up, and he carried her back to the carriage. But the shoes were still dancing, and the feet in them were still dancing. Even though he had her pinned down to the floor, she was legs in the air, petticoat akimbo, shaking and shouting, and her legs kicking up, and finally they got her shoes off, and her feet calmed down. But what a scene it had been! The fury of the old woman. "I took you in out of the goodness of my own heart, and you do this to me. You do this to me." And she slammed the red shoes down when they got home and said never touch them again. But they seemed to whisper at her from the cupboard. And she would open the cupboard at night, and even in the dark, they shone like wildness. They shone like madness. They shone like hot pokers. They shone like bright red things shine. She thought that they were the most beautiful things on the face of the earth, and she thought of nothing else. And the old woman was becoming ill, so she stayed to her bed, and the girl saw her chance, and she took those shoes off, and she thought, "I'll just wear them for a moment. I'll just wear them whilst I'm in the house. I might even not put them on. I might just look at them." And she looked at them, and the gaze became a longing and a power, and her arms reached out, and she had put them onto her feet before she knew it. What harm can I do just putting on a pair of shoes, she thought. And as soon as she put them on, she wanted to point her feet, and as soon as she put them on, she wanted to move and to dance. So she did. She danced. She put some music on and she danced. She danced around her room, and she danced downstairs, and she turned and she danced, and she kicked and she span and she danced. It was a wild dance and a happy dance and a vigorous dance. Oh, she danced. She didn't know she was in any trouble. She was enjoying herself so much. But then she tried to turn one way, and the shoes didn't. The shoes turned the other way. And then she tried to slow down a bit. She was out of breath, but the shoes, they wouldn't slow down. They were going faster and faster and faster and faster. And she wanted to go that way, but they insisted on going ahead, ahead, ahead. And they were dancing her. They were dancing her down the road, and they were dancing her out and across the fields and into the forest. If you don't enter the forest, your life will never begin. You must enter the forest, or your life will never begin. And she saw him there, that soldier, and he looked at her. "Oh my," he said, "what beautiful dancing shoes, and she was so scared. She tried to pull the shoes off there and then, but she couldn't. Much as she tried, she kept trying to pull them off, but she couldn't pull them off. And she hopped on one foot and trying to take the other one off, and she on the other, but nothing. They were stuck to the ground and still dance and dance and dance. And she danced over the hills, and she danced over the valleys, and she danced through night, and she danced through sunrise, and she danced through twilight. But it wasn't good dancing anymore. It was terrible dancing. It was horrible dancing. She couldn't stop, and she wanted to stop, and the days were going and turning, and the hours were moving, and she couldn't stop, and she couldn't stop, and she could not stop. She danced into the churchyard. "You cannot enter here," said the spirit of dread, and she was clinging to the railings, trying, reaching for help. "You shall dance in your red shoes until you become like a wraith, like a ghost, till your skin hangs from your bones, till there's nothing left of you but entrails dancing. You'll dance door to door through all the villages, and you'll strike each door 3 times. And when people peer out and look at you, they'll think, 'Thank God it's not me. Thank God it's not me. Dance, red shoes, you shall dance.'" And she begged for mercy, but her fingers were ripping away from the pole, and off she was dancing again, over and over through the nettles she danced, and they spiked and they scratched her. Still she was dancing, and she was back at her old house. But what was this? There was a coffin. It must have been the funeral of the old lady, and there was a pang and movement inside her, and she wanted to stay, but she couldn't. She just kept on dancing. So she danced on, and she danced on, and she was exhausted, and she was horrified, and she danced into the forest where the executioner lived. And he knew something needed cutting, because the axe on the wall began to tremble. "Please," she begged the executioner as she danced by his door, "please, please cut off my shoes, please." And he knew it was the right thing to do, because the axe was gleaming, and so he sliced through the straps, but they stayed on her feet. They wouldn't move, they wouldn't budge, and still she was dancing, and she was frightened, and she was dancing. And so she said, my feet, just do it, just do it, just do it. My life is worth nothing, my life is worth nothing." So he cut off her feet, and the red shoes kept dancing off and out of sight. And the girl, she was a cripple, and she bled in the earth. And she had to find her own way in the world, and she was never again wishing for red shoes. She never again wished, someone's at the door, but I'm just going to have to ignore it. So they seem quite insistent, but, if they're a good friend, they know where the key is, so they'll just have to let themselves in. And then we'll have to take it from there, my friends. So then, it's a brutal ending, isn't it? It's such a brutal ending. And I know that in the book, Dr. E says that what she does is that she slowly finds her way back, that her feet grow back. And I love this notion of the feet growing back. And I wonder how, like I think of addiction, because that's why I really chose this. It's Noah. In a minute, he'll kind of clock that I'm recording a podcast, and he'll maybe be a bit quiet, but we can't hope for that. So she just she's there, she's crippled, and like we all have been, like we all have been in these moments where our patterns, our addictions, our ways of being, they don't work for us anymore. They don't work for us, and we have to say goodbye to them. But or they kill us, or they kill a part of us, and there's no way of reclaiming or getting that back into balance. We have to just chop it away, and then it takes time. It takes time for that to grow back. It takes time for us to find out what it was within us that we started to put this addiction on top of, and feel those places and find deeper underneath that what brought us joy, what our simple pleasure was, how we reached for those little scraps in the first place. So she goes through that process where she begins to reach for the scraps again. And Dr. E says that if she was left to her own devices, she would have made more shoes and more shoes and more shoes. And of course, the first one is crude. And remember that when we start anything, when we try anything, remember that. Because the first one's crude and the second one's better, and then better again. So she will find her way, and we will find our way in whatever has been lost to us and whatever moves back in for us. We can use our inventiveness and our creativity to create a handmade life for ourselves. So let's just feel for ourselves for a moment. What is it that brings us a simple pleasure? What kind of creating brings us a simple pleasure? Is it a stitch or a drawn line or making a shape with pebbles on the beach? And let's allow our real tiny young places to remember those moments in life, to redo them so that we can stay in relationship with those places. Now, Dr. E, she has 30 pages of dissemination in here, and it's all really, really fascinating and interesting, but I'm not going to go through all of them on this podcast, or any of them. I'm just going to tell you from my experience and from what I remember what these this story can mean. And I'm thinking about the carriage coming along and the times in our life where we have gone for the soulless because it's been lucrative or it's looked good in some way, and it's felt choiceless. I don't think she felt like she had any choice but to get into that carriage. And so to go back to those places in ourselves and remember we got choice. And she certainly will say no next time. And thinking about this woman that lives up with us on the inside, the one that tells us that we can't be wild and we can't be natural, and that handmade life is a waste of time. And it's so, so, so important to really understand that if our soul is starved, it will reach for poison. If our soul is starved, it does reach for things that become addictive. So in order to feed the soul, however silly it might seem or feel, it's just so important. And she talks a little bit about instinct injury, which is something that happens in the book. She talks about in the book quite a lot, where you've already. So she gets into the gilded carriage, and that is the moment when she ignores her instincts. Because if her instincts were awake or alive, or she was connected with them in that moment, she would have gone, no thanks, thanks, but no thanks. But she hungers for something else, something she's been told she needs. And so she steps in. What harm can she do? But, she's going to be rich, she's going to be whatever. But she can't make any good choices after that, because there's a place where she hasn't listened to her instinct. So it creates a separation with the way that she listens to her instinct. So it's injured. And then when your instincts aren't in place, then it's really hard to make good choices for yourself. And there's lots of other great stuff in this book. I've just kind of surmised a little bit for you. I hope enough. But I wanted this to be a bit of a skinny pod because it's the bonus one because I'll be away at the festival and I can hear, Noah's making all kinds of noises. So I'll have to see what he's up to. So I will be doing something similar at the end of September with another story from this book, and it's the story that we worked most with when I was in Colorado. It's The Handless Maiden, and at the Chalice Well in January, we went through the story, taking it in pieces and crafting with it and creating ritual with it and sharing and circle stories. And so I'm doing that in Wales, in this gorgeous place in Wales, in Pembrokeshire, at the end of September, the last weekend of September, for 3 nights. So if you want to come and join me and work on these stories in different ways, I'd really love to have you. I've got a few spaces left, so get in touch. I think that's all I've got to say today. Love you all. Great. I'm just kind of feeling out like the tendrils of myself, just kind of feeling out to who I might be talking to. So let me know who you are if you're listening, so that I can, feel you in these etheric realms. Have a brilliant time. Come and see me if you catch this on Friday and you happen to be at Pilton at Glastonbury Festival. Then I'm in the teepee field, the structure with the golden mushroom on top. As I said before, come and say hello. Bless your lives, bless your hearts, and I'll see you next week.